Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Tax Law Guy. I'm tax attorney Joshua Sells. Today we are going to be talking about what to do if you are facing the burden of tax debt hanging over your shoulders. That's not a position that anybody wants to be in. And so today we're going to look at five strategies to deal with back tax, how to get out from underneath that back tax burden. There are several ways of handling it, of course, but we're going to look at five strategies, five things to do if you have tax debt hanging over your shoulders. So let's get right into it. All right, welcome back. So again, as I mentioned, we're talking about five strategies of handling tax debt. So if you find yourself in a position of owing the IRS, we've compiled a list of five things that you need to do to deal with that. Now, I have several videos. We've talked about an offer in compromise before. We've talked about financial hardship. Lots of different ways of handling, lots of different methods, if you will, of handling back tax with the IRS. But these five strategies that I have for you today have been tried and true. In all my years of practice, these five things are absolutely critical. And the first one is making sure that all of the tax assessments are correct and assessed. Again, correct and assessed. So that number one strategy, you have to make sure that all of the tax periods have been assessed and that they are correct. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is pull your transcripts from the IRS. You don't need a tax professional to pull your transcripts. Of course, we do that as part of our every case that we have, but you are able to pull your IRS transcripts directly from irs.gov. You would just create a free account with the IRS, and you can actually pull your transcripts and see exactly which periods have been assessed by the IRS. And let me add, an assessment means that you owe the tax. Either you file a tax return or the IRS created one for you. There was an assessment. And so you want to check all of those periods this year all the way back to make sure that all of those returns have been filed. You don't want to miss a period, right? Because you go to resolve your tax debt, and if there's an open period, that would be a horrible situation to have that come up in the future after you've already dealt with your tax debt. So the first thing you need to do is make sure that your tax has been assessed, all those returns are filed and current, and that it's actually correct. Many times the IRS, if you don't file a tax return, will file one for you. This is called a substitute for return. They're going to go high, of course, especially if you're self-employed. You're not going to get any of those valuable expense deductions, all of which are likely valid, but you're not going to get those, and you're going to be hit with a huge tax bill. Depending on how you resolve your tax debt ultimately, you don't want to have that incorrect assessment hanging over your head. So again, you have to make sure that all your returns are filed and make sure that they are correct. If the IRS has issued an SFR, or substitute for return, it's a rather simple process of correcting that. You prepare the tax return, and then once that is prepared, now this is critical, you send it to the audit reconsideration department of the IRS. You do not send it to normal processing. It will be delayed, if not outright rejected. So the IRS has a location in Holtsville, New York, for SFR reconsiderations. My advice: put SFR reconsideration on top of the return and then attach a letter. Let the IRS know that this is an original delinquent return and you are asking for SFR reconsideration. They also have a location in Andover. So those two locations are the locations you would want to send an SFR reconsideration to. But again, you want to make sure that all those returns are done and correct. So the first thing that you need to do of our five-step strategy: make sure your returns are filed, make sure that the assessments are correct. The second thing that you must do as part of our five-step strategy is to contact the IRS. Look, this is extremely important, especially if the IRS has a revenue officer involved. You need to make contact. Now, many people will say that's a horrible idea. You shouldn't do that. And truly, there are certain scenarios where we would not advise against that. That's where the value of having a tax professional or a tax attorney look at your case would come into play. But generally speaking, we're going to want to make contact with the IRS. Again, that first step, we made sure everything was filed and correct. That second step, we're making contact with the IRS just to let them know that we are now working with them to figure out this issue, to resolve the tax debt. That's a very important step. Many folks will skip that and go right to the resolution phase, but I submit to you today that it's important to let the IRS know that you are working on a solution. Part of the issue that may come up, if the IRS is not aware that you're actively working to resolve your back tax, they may proceed with garnishment, tax liens, and other enhanced enforcement. And so letting them know that you are actively working on your tax debt may prevent that. That's something that we do as a tax attorney, as a tax law firm. We always let the IRS know when we are representing a client. That way they know that the client is actively working to resolve their tax debt. So don't be afraid necessarily of contacting the IRS, particularly if you are going to resolve your tax debt. Now, that being said, especially if there is a revenue officer involved, they may not be very forthcoming with you and they may not necessarily give you the best advice. If you're looking to protect your rights and make sure that your rights are preserved, especially those valuable appeal rights, then you may want to seek advice of a tax attorney. One instance in particular that I'm reminded of, a client of mine, I was not their attorney at the time, but the revenue officer advised them to file a collection due process hearing on a tax lien that he had filed against the taxpayers. Great information, great advice. However, that revenue officer told them to check the box on the form for what is called an equivalency hearing. You see, if you mark that box, then the IRS is now allowed to levy while the appeal is going through, which is what the IRS did. So don't take the IRS advice as the gospel truth. You definitely need a tax attorney to make sure that your rights are being preserved. But again, part of this 5-step strategy, number 1, making sure those assessments are made and correct. Number 2, communicating with the IRS. Number 3, make sure, if you have a significant enough of a case, that you do seek advice of a tax professional. I can't tell you how many times a client has came to me, or wasn't a client at the time, and did not get our advice, did not seek an opinion. Many times when we have folks who call us, they've already reached out to the IRS. Maybe they've already set up an installment agreement, or maybe they've already done some kind of resolution. We'll tell the clients, we'll tell the taxpayer, hey, you don't need a tax attorney. You got this covered. Anything that you're telling us, as long as it's true, looks like you have the situation handled. We are not out just to make a sale. That is not our goal. We want to make sure that taxpayers are getting great advice, and that certainly if we can help as a tax law firm, we certainly will. But ultimately, we want to make sure that taxpayers, just like yourself, are informed and their rights are being protected. So again, we're talking today about 5 strategies to handling back tax. That first one, making sure your returns are filed and correct. That second one, letting the IRS know, communicating with the IRS that you are actively working to resolve it. And third, especially if you owe a lot of money or there's some additional issues going on, get the advice of a tax attorney. Hey, any good tax attorney is going to give you a free consultation, myself included. We don't charge for that. We do a free consultation, free case analysis. Get advice of a tax professional. Again, just that consultation. A good tax attorney is going to tell you, hey, there's some complexities here. We recommend that you engage us to help you. Or, as I mentioned, we may tell you, hey, this is a simple case. You got it handled. Don't waste your money on a tax attorney or other professional. And we certainly have said that a lot to many different taxpayers. So again, we're talking about 5 strategies if you have back tax. And this is not rocket science. These aren't super complicated, but these are 5 proven strategies if you find yourself owing the IRS. Number 4. you've got to explore tax relief options. So if you've made sure all those returns are correct and filed, you've reached out to the IRS to let them know you're working on it to get it fixed, you've sought the advice of a tax professional. Number 4, consider your options. Hey, there are several different options if you owe back tax to the IRS. There's the offer in compromise. Depending on your financial situation, you may be able to get IRS back tax forgiveness through the IRS offer in compromise. It's a tax settlement program. That tax settlement program is driven by your income and your assets, 2 very important factors. It's not a negotiation with the IRS. It's merely a mathematical formula based on your income and assets. Hey, if you had a consultation with a tax attorney, a good tax attorney is going to tell you if you're eligible for that. Maybe you have equity in your house and you wouldn't necessarily qualify for an offer in compromise. Yet maybe you only have Social Security income or limited income for the household. You may qualify for a financial hardship. A financial hardship, also called a currently not collectible status, is another viable option to handle your tax debt. And then there's also installment agreement options. There's a streamlined installment agreement. There's a partial payment installment agreement option. There are different options that are available for you to resolve your back tax. Again, going back to that 3rd point, when you seek counsel from a tax attorney or a tax professional, they'll also look at things like the statute of limitations. The tax debt has a 10-year statute of limitations. The IRS doesn't have eternity to collect your back tax. They have 10 years minus any tolling events. And so you have to consider maybe it's best just to write out the clock depending on how old the tax debt is. So there are a lot of options. If there's a levy or a tax lien, you may be looking at a collection due process appeal against that particular tax year. So number 4, consider your options. It's not just a payment plan. There are a lot of other options available to you to resolve your back tax. I'm sure you've heard terms like the IRS Fresh Start Program. The IRS Fresh Start Program actually includes not just the streamlined installment agreement, but also the IRS offer in compromise. So those are some options that are available to help you resolve your back tax. But again, you have to, first of all, make sure the returns are filed and correct. Make sure that you've made contact with the IRS to prevent any enhanced enforcement action. Should get a consultation from a tax professional just to make sure that your rights are preserved. And then number 4, you should consider your options. Hey, many times I've told taxpayers, clients of mine, full paying the tax liability typically isn't a good idea, even if you have the cash available. Why? Because you may qualify for penalty abatement. You may owe $100,000, but maybe $20,000, $30,000 of that is related to penalties. And so you should consider your options. Yes, the IRS does have the option to waive penalties, whether it's a first-time penalty abatement or if it's based on reasonable cause. And so again, a good tax attorney, as I mentioned in the 3rd step here, is going to advise you on that. But number 4, consider your options. Consider your tax relief options. Finally, number 5. And this one isn't that exciting, but this is more for preventative medicine. You have to consider what got you into this position in the first place. If you resolve your back tax, typically a condition of that resolution is that you can't owe again, at least for the next 5 years. So that being said, you want to consider what ultimately got you into the position where you had IRS back tax. If it was self-employment, how can you make sure that you're not in that position again? We all get it. Come April, you get the tax return done, there's a huge balance, and it seems like you thought you'd have the money available, but we never do, right? And that's just life. Life happens. So what can you do in the meantime? What can you do throughout the year instead of waiting maybe quarterly or even till the end of the year? The IRS will allow you to make weekly estimated tax payments. You can make monthly, however you want. So break it down into a smaller amount. Hey, if it was self-employment that ultimately got you into the position where you owed back tax, maybe you're a real estate agent or some other 1099 independent contractor, a gig worker as we call them today, then you have the option of making these payments as the year progresses, not just quarterly, and make them electronically. I cannot emphasize this enough. Don't mail the IRS a check. Those are more likely to get lost and misapplied. So you want to go onto irs.gov /direct Pay. The link is in the description below. And you'll want to make electronic estimated tax payments. That's the best thing that you can do if you find yourself in this tax situation over and over every single year. You have to stop the bleed. You have to look at what got you in this position and make sure that it's not going to carry forward as you move on. You may also look at tax planning opportunities. Hey, if you're a small business, maybe it makes sense to be an S corporation, to go ahead and form the LLC and then opt or elect to be taxed as an S corporation. There's a significant tax savings there, and reducing that tax burden may make all the difference so as to not add additional tax going forward. Maybe you're a W-2 employee and you just do not have enough withholdings coming out. Do a calculation. Go into the IRS website. They have a wonderful W-4 calculator where you basically can determine what you should have withheld from your paycheck. But you have to look at, how did I get into this position and how do I make sure that I don't repeat it going forward? All right, 5 things, 5 very simple strategies, 5 simple parts of a strategy to make sure that you can deal with back tax and not have it repeat itself in the future. Again, we deal with clients day in and day out. We deal with the IRS all the time, and these are the 5 steps that we recommend if you have IRS back tax. Again, we go into more detail on other videos, specifically about the IRS offering compromise or penalty abatement, but this high-level approach of what to do if you have IRS back tax is proven effective time and time again. And again, we can't emphasize this enough. If you find yourself overwhelmed by the burden of tax debt, scared of those letters that are coming in the mail, and boy, are those aggressive, right? It seems like lately they've become even more aggressive. Worried that an IRS agent is going to schedule a time to meet with you. Worried that you're going to wake up and find your bank account emptied, or your job is going to be faced with a garnishment. If those things are worrying you, if that's keeping you up at night, then do yourself a favor, reach out to us. As I mentioned in that 3rd step, we do free consultations, a free case analysis. We shoot straight. Look, we're not out to get a buck from you. We're out to help. That's our goal. Again, we do this video series, the Tax Law Guy video series. We've been doing this for many years. We just want to be a resource and we want to be a help. If you do have a question and maybe you don't want to pick up the phone and call, feel free to drop a message. Hey, my staff and myself personally, we review these daily, and we like to offer any advice or any information that we can. All right, again, thanks for watching Tax Law Guy. I'll see you next week.